Hi, I'm Professor Thomas White, founder and executive director of the International Business Ethics Case Competition. Welcome to part 2 of my 3-part apology and warning to the class of 2020. Sad way to be graduating, but here we are. As I said in the first introduction, I believe your generation is owed an apology from my generation and your parents' generation for the fact that things have gotten so bad in relation to COVID-19. There are many reasons that things have gotten so bad and that the response of our nation has been so terrible. But there is one factor that I think is very important and has been overlooked as one of the factors that have produced our situation. As I hinted in the introduction, over the past 50 years, the country, has become really dangerously ignorant. The point of this piece of video is to make my case on that. This is something that your generation can be addressed. Your generation is currently being victimized by it and will continue to be. But if you can identify the problem, you can start addressing it. But it's important that you actually understand what's going on. So let me share my screen and bring up my presentation. As I've said, the problem that I'm going to point to, the factor I'm going to point to as one of the reasons that things have gotten so bad in our response to COVID-19 is because of a serious level of ignorance in America. So how bad is it? My claim is that millions of Americans simply don't see things for how they really are. They don't perceive threats appropriately, which means they aren't going to respond appropriately. They're vulnerable to misinformation and manipulation. Level ignorance of this level is absolutely dangerous, and that this poses a special threat to your generation. In some ways, I'll go into this more in the third video than in this, but keep that in mind that you're bearing the brunt of this kind of really serious ignorance. When I say this is dangerous, so we have currently more than 90,000 Americans have died. There are current projections more than 150,000 will die, and as I said, this is in the first wave. That is self-evidently dangerous if ignorance has led to that. The other are some of the troubling images we've seen where people with assault weapons have now been protesting at and storming into state legislature, as happened in Michigan, to claim that they are being treated poorly, they need to be able to protest, and the rest. Not only is this dangerous to have armed people wandering around like that, menacing people, this is then basically the equivalent of domestic terrorism. Notice that, okay, so it was a rainy day, which is why they're wearing rain ponchos, and they may have face masks. But if you understand the situation, you know that face masks protect other people, they don't protect you. So if there's anyone in the vicinity of these guys who has the virus, which is a good possibility, they stand a better than even chance of actually getting it. So dangerous levels of ignorance, not only to other people, but dangerous levels of ignorance to ourselves. One of the ways in which levels of education, levels of competencies is measured is through what's called the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, the PIAAC. This is in the United States, administered through the Department of Education. Generally speaking, the OECD, I believe, is the group mainly that oversees it. This is done on a regular basis to evaluate adult intellectual competencies on the planet. We're going to look at two things two of the results of the most recent test: literacy, that is the ability to understand, use, and respond appropriately to written texts, and numeracy, the ability to use basic mathematical and computational skills. So we aren't talking about anything more sophisticated here than reading, writing, thinking, and arithmetic. So what did the test show? For literacy and reasoning, now the results are broken down to 5 levels. As you see, most people came up here, 36% of the population. Now we're talking, the study was, I believe, people between 15 and 65. So 36% were able to do level 3, 13% level 4, 5, below level 1, level 2. Let's take an example of a literacy 3 question, which is what most people could do. Okay, welcome to our preschool. This is a memo given to parents dropping their children off at a preschool. So it's a set of rules. Please have your child here by 9. Bring a small blanket or pillow. Dress your child comfortably. No jewelry or candy. Bring your child fully dressed. Sign in. Breakfast will be served till 7:30. Medications have to be in original containers. If you have any questions, here's who you contact. Okay, the question in the PIAAC was, what is the latest time that children should arrive at preschool? Notice that there are only 2 times in the instructions that time is mentioned, when breakfast is served until and have your child here by 9. This is obviously the correct answer. Please have your child here by 9 a.m. Now, this is a level 3 question. The significance of the result here is that 51% of the people in this test could not do level 3 questions. Their literacy and reasoning abilities were below level 1 or level 2. So a slight majority of the population of the United States can't do that kind of a problem we just saw. Let's move on to numeracy. You notice here, things look initially a little worse because level 3 had the highest level with literacy. Level 2 has it at numeracy. Let's look at a level 3 question. So, an ad for running or sale for running shoes. Buy 1 pair, get the second of equal or lesser value for half price. I'm sure you've seen this sort of thing around a lot. Here are the 2 pair, $34.20, $29.50. The question on the test was, how much would you pay during the sale if you purchased the 2 pairs of shoes? So you pay full price for this one, you get the second equal or lesser value, so you get half of that, which means $34.20 plus $29.50 times 50%, and that gives us $48.95. That's the correct question, the correct answer. That's a level 3 question. So 61% of the people in the survey, representing people in the United States, could not do this. Now that's not rocket science. That's not that difficult a question. That's still, we're just talking about arithmetic there. Now remember, level 3 and level 4, I mean, we have 4 and 5 all the way up through. So let's take a look and see what a level 4 question looks like. The Cooper test is a standard test for physical fitness. You run as hard as you can for 12 minutes and see how far you go. The survey, the PIAAC posed the following problem. You have a 27-year-old woman. So the Cooper test is broken down by gender and age, and you have different categories here. So the problem was you have a 27-year-old woman who, on the first time, ran 1,800 meters, which put her in the average category. If she wants to progress into the good category, what percentage of improvement does she need to make? So that means she needs to go from running 1,800 meters to running 2,200 meters. What percentage of improvement is that? So you do 2,200 minus 1,800, get the difference of 400, that divided by 1,800, which is the first thing. She needs to make a 22% improvement to move from average to good. Okay, that's a level 4 question. 10% of the people in the study could do that. 90% could not. Now, this is not rocket science. This is still arithmetic. It takes a little thinking, but 90% of the people in this test who are representative of the United States population can't do this kind of a problem. What grade then would we give ourselves as a nation for literacy and reasoning? D. Grade for numeracy, even worse, D minus. And I'm just respecting the fact that we're in the middle of, we do grade inflation. Those could easily be Fs, but but we're being generous. Let's move on. What do Americans know or don't know about science? And now this is especially important at this point when we're dealing with a global pandemic. How good are people at understanding scientific issues? Well, the news is not terribly encouraging. 24% of Americans believe that the sun goes around the earth. 58% believe that the Big Bang did not happen. 51% believe that humans did not evolve, despite the fact that all three of those are empirically verifiable. Let's just ask about what people know about disease. Okay, good news. 76% know that an incubation period is the time during which someone has an infection but is not showing symptoms. But the flip side of this is that 24% do not know this. 55% know that antibiotics cannot kill viruses. 45% though do not know this. At a time that we're dealing with an incredibly aggressive virus that is, raging through the country, we have a quarter of the population to half of the population who don't fully understand what the deal is with viruses and infection, which means that they don't understand the threat that all of this poses to them, their families, and so they don't really understand what would be appropriate protective behavior. So we then end up with things like this, protests against the stay-at-home orders. Now, the virus is such, you probably know, it can be transmitted by people who are not showing symptoms. So odds are, if there is one person in this group, and it's highly contagious, not just contagious, highly contagious. If there is one person in this group, in this protest, who had that virus, a bunch of those people came down with it. And that was just plain stupid, given the nature of the virus. But if you don't understand what a virus is, if you don't understand how infectious it is, sure, you're going to think this is okay to do, but it really is a testimony to ignorance rather than anything else. By the way, speaking of ignorance and arithmetic, let's do another little problem. So, how many cases have there been in the United States? Because there's now debate about whether the official number is an undercount. So the official number, as of the 17th of May, was 1.5 million. The death rate is currently estimated to be around 1%. And the official number of deaths is currently around 90,000. However, if we say, well, if it's a 1% death rate, well, let's figure out what the actual number is. The actual number is probably like 8 million, 8 to 9 million cases of people who have been infected. Now, if you're telling yourself, well, it's less than 100,000, maybe we can go protest, that's one thing. If on the other hand, it's 8 million, that shows that this is much more serious. And by the way, there's also supposition that the number of deaths has been undercounted for a variety of reasons. People dying of the disease before it was identified as COVID-19, people who die before they get to the hospital, people who on whom there's been no investigation of the nature of their death. That number is probably higher. Even the death number is probably higher. Let's stay in this domain of what do we know or don't know about science. So a few years ago, NASA decided they wanted to know how scientifically literate, we might say, how scientifically literate the American population was. So they said, let's find out, what they called the level of civic scientific literacy, which they define as the ability of a citizen to find, make sense of, and use information about science or technology to engage in a public discussion of policy choices involving science or technology. This is a skill that's especially important in democratic societies. So yeah, this is if you're in a democracy and policies are going to be set by voting and democratic means, then you want your electorate to understand what they're going to be making choices about. So question is how and NASA is not looking for anything really sophisticated here. It's more, if you can you read, for example, a story in the New York Times science section that or some other thing that talks about science, understand what the basics are, and then be in a position to make a choice about policy issues, have an opinion about policy issues. They found out that only 28% of the population was scientifically literate. Not even a third of the American population has enough of a basic grasp of science to make an intelligent choice about policy. So once again, if you're looking at that in the context of a global pandemic of a new virus, it's no surprise that people just don't get how dangerous the situation is and then fail to act appropriately. What would our grade be for scientific literacy? Again, we're being generous, but that's not going to be anything more than a D. Now, I want to look fairly specifically at levels of ignorance as it relates to global climate change, because in my experience in teaching the last few years, climate change is a non-issue for your generation. That is, it's just obvious. I mean, look, it's obvious to anyone who knows the basic science of this. But certainly, in my experience, people of your generation just are not skeptics about this. So what you know, of course, what we're talking about is something related to the greenhouse effect. Sunlight hits the earth, some of it's reflected back, some of it's kept in the atmosphere. What's kept in the atmosphere, mainly because of CO2 and other gases that trap the heat. What we have is a situation in which, since industrialization, the amount of carbon dioxide has increased and the temperature of the planet has increased on a pretty consistent basis. Not only that, this is an absolutely unique level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, this is a graph that shows levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere going back 400,000 years. By the way, you can do that by using ice core samples. And you can see there's been some, up and down in terms of the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but we have never been up here. And that's the result of industrialization and pumping so much carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels into the atmosphere. Now, carbon dioxide, increased CO2, global warming, climate change isn't just a warmer planet and rising ocean levels. It's also produced superstorms, earthquakes, extreme heat, drought, food and water shortages. One of the most important other consequences, which frequently gets ignored, is the security implications. There are two excellent studies done by the Center for Naval Analyses that talk about the way, these are done by retired senior military officials, about the national security risk to climate change. For example, the relationship between climate change, failed states, international terrorism, and the like. So this is not just days getting warmer and the beach getting smaller. This is the possibility of really significant national security threats. The news is not good going forward. The latest UN climate report says that the forecast is bleak. Now, this actually has not been a debatable issue among scientists since 1990, when the first report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was issued. So now, what percentage of climate scientists think that human-caused global warming is happening? Turns out it's 97%. Now, if you know anything about scientific research, it is almost never heard of that you get that much agreement on anything among scientists and researchers in general. Nonetheless, 97% of climate scientists think real human-caused and happening. Okay, that's a scientific perspective, but as I said, we're talking about dangerous levels of ignorance in the population. What is the perception of that among the population? Great study on this, Climate Change in the American Mind, put out April 2019 of the Center of Climate Change Communication. Okay, so mixed news here. About 7 in 10 Americans think global warming is happening. Okay, that's encouraging. But then you say, well, are you sure it's happening? Well, then that drops from down to less than half. So more than half, and now okay, more than half of Americans think global warming is human caused. So 55%, okay, better than half, but of course, among climate scientists, that number is 97. So let's go back to the nearly half of Americans are sure global warming is happening. Okay, if you put all of this together, that means 46% who are not sure, the 8% who think it's not. We're talking about more than half of the population who do not know it is, are not convinced that it is going on, despite the fact that, remember, 97% of climate scientists agree that global warming is happening and is human caused and is serious. Now, when asked this question, to the best of your knowledge, what percentage of climate scientists think human caused global warming is happening? This is what most people think. They don't know. Only 17% of the population in the United States knows that 97% of climate scientists agree. Look at this. They're all over the place. The right answer is 97%. Not even 20% of the population knows that. So again, really dangerous levels of ignorance. So what is the grade we give ourselves for knowledge about the threat from global warming? Again, we're being generous if we give ourselves a D. As long as we're talking about ignorance as it relates to public policy, disease, and the like, it's worth to ask, what do Americans know about the Constitution? Well, little over a third of the population can name even one right protected by the First Amendment. A little more than a quarter can name all 3 branches of government. A third of the population cannot name even one branch of government. So, I mean, this is just massive political and constitutional ignorance. Only a third can name even one right protected by the First Amendment. A quarter, all 3 branches of government. A third can't even name one branch of government. What grade would we give ourselves for literacy about the Constitution and the structure of our government? Well, that's an F. Now, when you put those all together, scientific literacy, literacy in reasoning, constitutional literacy, numeracy, we become America the not so smart. We certainly do not have anything to be proud of, of ourselves for in something like this. And on top of that, and actually part of a factor that develops that is that there has been an ongoing, we might say, war on facts and truth. As I said, in addition to the kind of casual levels of ignorance that kind of just happened, there's also been a concerted war on truth and facts in the United States. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a bit, but this is all over the place. For example, we see claims that global warming is a hoax that comes from Donald Trump, the anti-vaccination folk, people who claim that the Russian attack on our election didn't happen. And now these are 2 things I'm going to come back to in the next video. But this claim, tax cuts will pay for themselves. Okay, if you cut taxes on the rich, they'll invest that money and create jobs for everyone. This is the idea, supply side economics, or wealth trickles down. By the way, all of these things are false, but this is part of what is then a kind of concerted effort, sort of concerted assault on the truth and assault on facts. Sadly, this is now becoming, I mean, this is just bizarre that truth and fact should have a partisan political dimension to it. On asking people about their attitudes about climate change, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or independent, whether it's a serious problem and understanding the harm that's being done, Republicans say it's not such a big deal, Democrats say it's a bigger deal. Well, scientists, remember, 97%, so all of these people are wrong. If we now say just in terms of the current crisis we're looking at, the coronavirus, do you think it's a real threat or blown out of proportion? Again, this varies according to political party. Democrats say it's more of a threat, Republicans say less of a threat, independents say they're not so sure, or kind of in the middle. But the science is quite clear. It is a major threat. You don't find any public health people say, oh yeah, maybe not such a big deal. But you do have attempts to get people to not understand that and somehow lash that to their political allegiance. Okay, so here's the truth. This is when I talk about assault on truth and kind of a campaign against truth and facts, I'm going to give you a really specific example. So March 11th, the World Health Organization declares the coronavirus outbreak to be a pandemic, that it is going to spread across the planet. That's the truth. That's what people should have been told. Now here's something that, a little clip of how Fox News responded to this.
So you want to know how I really feel about the coronavirus, Juan? If I get it, I'll beat it.
I want to tell you the truth about the coronavirus.
This is their next attempt to get Trump.
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president.
The fatality rate's just 1%. So who cares if it's 10 times more lethal than the flu?
The national left-wing media playing up fears of the coronavirus.
We're shutting down our country because of the cold virus.
Coronavirus fear-mongering by the deep state.
The flu is showing much more of an impact on Americans than coronavirus. At worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
All the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality.
The coronavirus is the common cold.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing.
A lot of people will have this, and it's very mild.
Children are not really affected.
They'll get better very rapidly. They don't even see a doctor. They don't even call a doctor.
I am far more concerned with stepping on a used heroin needle than I am getting the coronavirus.
We can't err on the side of caution anymore. That's the strategy of losers.
It's called the power of positive thinking.
It's a great time to just go out, go to a local restaurant.
Yeah, it's actually the safest time to fly.
This is the best country in the world to get coronavirus.
But maybe that's just me.
You think we're bad for America? You think I'm bad for America?
Yeah.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now, let me point out that, as is just mentioned here, that piece of video about the way Fox News was dealing with the coronavirus, put out by the Lincoln Project, to make sure that everyone is aware that this is a matter of, quite a matter of record. The Lincoln Project is a group of conservative Republican strategists who are pushing back against what they see as a campaign against truth. So this is not left-wing media. If anything, this is right-wing professionals who put this together. Now, as I said, the truth was on March 11th, the World Health Organization said global pandemic. 2 days later, these people are up, talking this down. This is what gaslighting looks like. This is what a campaign against truth looks like. And so for people who don't understand the science, you can understand how they can easily be manipulated. So our basic question, how bad is the ignorance? As I said, this is really dangerous. Millions of Americans do not see things for how they really are. They don't perceive threats appropriately. They're vulnerable to misinformation and manipulation. The level of ignorance is dangerous, and this poses a special threat to your generation. Now, the reason I wanted to sort of convey this message to you is that, look, if you don't recognize a threat, you won't take action against it. So whether it's the threat against your own health, the threat against the kind of government that's supposed to be there to protect you, the threat against, global climate change. If you don't recognize the threat, you won't take action against it. So the point of this message, the point of this video, is to try to give you an idea of just how dangerous the ignorance is that is characteristic of the country. And keep in mind that ignorance is as dangerous as any life-threatening disease. You just have to think back to like the Salem witch trials or any other time where superstition and ignorance took control. You know, ignorance kills people as much as a deadly disease. We then have become America the vulnerable, with such poor levels of scientific literacy, reasoning, numeracy, constitutional literacy, and an ongoing campaign against facts and truth. We're just, you know, there are millions of Americans who can easily be manipulated to do things and think things that are not only not in their interest, they're absolutely not in your interest. So what can your generation do? Well, first of all, you have to recognize the problem. Part of it is just this massive ignorance in the United States. Second, you have to be sensitive to the fact that there are specific ways that people try to deceive you by lying or illogical reasoning. Well, you know, this is one of the things we're going to look at, you know, in the next video, this sort of logical error of the false dilemma. People say, oh, it's A or B. Now they're saying, well, it's reopen the economy entirely or destroy the economy. Well, no, it's not like that. You know, A and B dilemmas are usually not true. So you have to recognize the way that people are trying to mislead you. Don't be conned by the claim that there are always two sides. No, global warming is real serious and human caused. There is no second opinion on that. Wealth does not trickle down. Vaccines prevent disease. So, you know, when someone says, well, gee, there are always two sides, no, that's on many cases, yes. Other issues, no. You really do have to insist on evidence as you try to figure things out. And you have to develop the expertise to understand the evidence. That takes time. You have to get a feel for climate science. You have to get a feel for viruses, epidemiology. You have to be in a position to evaluate if what you're told is true or false. You don't have to become an expert, but you have to be literate in an area in order to then understand what's in your interest, what's in your generation's interest, and what you can do. Now, let me stop this. In the next video that I'm going to do, it takes up as I said, this is all part of the apology and the situation that we've gotten, which is that we have massive dangerous ignorance in the United States. The warning is going to be the topic of the next video, and that's that you are going to be told you have to sacrifice your future in order to pay for everything that we need to pay for in order to dig out of the hole that we're in terms of the virus and the deficit. What you're going to be told is false. I'm going to show you that. I'm also going to suggest what the truth is and give you at least a couple of thoughts about how you might approach this. The warning is in the next video, so hope to see you there.